Who is the absolutely most disturbing person you've ever met? Story 1. I had two roommates in college. I wasn't particularly close to either of them, but we came from the same town. One of them had a younger brother, and she asked me if he could spend the night on our couch for a night or two. Not great, but I didn't complain. I can't explain it, but he was unsettling. There was a deadness to his eyes, and he hardly spoke. I was very glad when he was gone. A few years later, I found out how disturbing he really was. Apparently, his parents had kicked him out because he had been stealing from them, but he came back and made a hiding place in the garage and stayed there. I guess he cleared it up during the day because they had no idea how long he was doing that. Anyway, he broke into the house next door. Simple burglary would be bad enough, but no. He hung out for hours and waited for the homeowner to come back. He attacked her with an axe. He was captured not long after, driving her car. He was sentenced to death a few years later. The whole story really wasn't a surprise. He was the most frightening person I have ever been near, and I knew something was off about him long before it happened. Story 2. A man used to follow me home from school when I was 15. He made my skin crawl, and I always made sure I was never alone, because he would be waiting at the bus stop no matter what time I passed it, even if I'd had detention. He would just stand there until I walked past, then walk behind me very closely all the way home, occasionally calling me pretty or asking if he could take me out. Thank goodness for my friends being extra protective, because when I was 18, he was convicted of the murder of a 17-year-old girl he had been seeing, who, when the picture was printed in the paper, looked eerily similar to me. Story 3. I had to walk to the local elementary school to pick up my sister. The school was several blocks away, and this creepy guy had followed me in his car a few times. But this time, I had my baby sister. She was 5. I tried hiding from him, going through yards and empty lots, and thought we lost him. We reached our house, but the guy had followed us there. I ran inside with my sister and ran into my father. I cried that a man had followed us. My dad is a small man, but he was furious. He threw open the front door, ran to the car, and jumped on the hood. My father never used strong words in front of us kids or my mother, but I heard him yell that if this man ever came near his daughters or our home again, he would regret it. The neighbors saw this and asked what was going on. My father told them that this man had been stalking us. The neighbors held him until the police showed up. It turned out this guy had been following several girls from the elementary school. I was glad that my dad happened to come home early. I don't know if I would have told him otherwise. Story 4. I used to work in the law courts and saw plenty of troubling characters. I had to sit in on some awful inquests, but there's one kid that sticks with me. Mondays were allocated for children's court, usually teenage kids appearing for things like theft or vandalism. Many of these kids were clearly from backgrounds of low income and neglect. One boy turned up in a private school uniform, blazer, tie, and polished shoes, with parents who were dressed immaculately. The school on the uniform was a prestigious one, with very high fees. He looked no older than 16, blonde, baby-faced, with glasses. He looked entirely out of place among the scruffy other teens in tracksuits. I was inside the courtroom when this boy appeared, and just, wow. The other kids that morning had been charged with shoplifting or graffiti, but this boy, who looked so innocent and quiet, had attempted to assault not one, but 2 girls at a school camp. He had waited until everyone was asleep, and when the first girl left her room to go to the bathrooms down the hall, he dragged her into a cupboard and tried to overpower her. She managed to fight him off and then ran to wake a teacher. That teacher found him moments later with his hands around the throat of the second girl. Story 5. When I worked in a supermarket as a cashier, there was one regular customer who looked and behaved exactly like the picture you'd see in a dictionary next to the word creepy. You know how they always say most dangerous people look like normal, everyday people? He did not. He always made a point to come through my till and tell me I was pretty or ask if I had a boyfriend, hinting that he'd like to do things to me if I was your boyfriend. After I'd served him, he would just stand at the end of my register and stare at me. Sometimes he'd stand outside the plate glass windows at the front and watch me. Just to add some context, I was 19 at the time, but I was often mistaken for being much younger. I told management, but of course, they wouldn't do anything because they only had my word. Then he started following one of the female managers around the supermarket and was promptly banned. One time he was outside staring at me again, and one of the other cashiers recognized him as a man who lived on her street. He'd recently been released from prison, where he'd been serving time for harming his own daughter. Story 6. I spent a year couch surfing after I got kicked out at 19. One place I ended up was an acquaintance's nearly condemned trailer, and this place really attracted some of the worst people in town. Unfortunately, I had no other place to stay at the time. I had a 2-liter bottle of soda in the back of the fridge with my name on it and "Please do not touch" written on it. As silly as it sounds, it was a comfort to me to have just one thing that was mine and also a treat I could sip on whenever I needed a small escape. I didn't mind if my roommates drank it, really, but the main guy of this place always had strangers or sketchy people over, and I didn't want them drinking my soda, especially straight out of the bottle. One day I woke up to basically half a cup of soda left in the bottle. It had been nearly full the night before. I got upset and asked, "Hey, who drank my Dr. Pepper?" Everyone told me it was this guy I'll call KT. KT was a very strange kid. He was either my age or a year younger and had a bad reputation for stealing, drugs, and all kinds of trouble. I didn't confront him because frankly he freaked me out, and I decided it wasn't worth more discomfort over some soda. A few weeks later, KT's best friend, I'll call him C, went missing during our county fair. C was a great kid, good friends with my brother, and got along with everyone. KT went around town bragging that C was gone and that he was responsible. It turned out to be true. KT killed C over drugs and about $300. His body was found cut up and burned in the woods not far from town. The fact that I was in the presence of this kid only about a month before he killed his own best friend still keeps me up at night. Our town misses C a lot, and there has been more violence here since then. KT will thankfully spend the rest of his life in prison, along with 3 accomplices. Story 7. In college, I lived out in the country in a boarding house with other girls. The landlords drove us into town to drop us off or pick us up. One time there was a guy in the van. I sat next to him. Everything seemed normal. They dropped him off at his house before going home. That evening, Mrs. Landlord shared more about the man in the van. She said he could act pleasant at times, but then recalled a troubling moment where a young person had to hide from him until morning. He was widely known for becoming difficult when drinking. I was stunned they had even given him a ride home, especially since I had been seated right next to him. I never saw him again, and I chose to move out before the school year ended because of other unsettling decisions Mrs. Landlord made. Story 8. My ex-husband had the mindset of an incel toward me and all women. He constantly made comments and critiqued women's bodies. It was as if we were put there only to serve his needs. No matter what he got, it was never enough. I tried and tried. He pressured me into doing some intimate things I was not comfortable with. Then he was upset that I wasn't enjoying the act he knew I was uncomfortable with. It was constant pressure. He told me often that I owed him, but it was never the other way around. I wanted a partner to build a life together that was better than the poverty he grew up in. He had a middle-class life with me for the first time, but that wasn't good enough. He wanted someone he could dominate and control. The last straw was him deciding that since I couldn't meet his needs, I needed to agree to let him randomly sleep with other women and then come home to me. I obviously objected to this, and I was disgusted that he called himself a Christian but wanted permission to commit adultery. He eventually wore me down by asking constantly and then refusing to speak to me when I said no. He would make margaritas and offer me one so he could ask when I was drunk. One night, I just broke and said, "Okay, go ahead." He asked me to say, "Just go ahead and have fun." So I did, but I added that I didn't want to know anything about it. And I said this would not work out the way he thought it would. Long story short, I discovered that he was trashing me online in his ads to get women to meet him for free. He made fun of me and told strangers that his wife couldn't satisfy him, comparing me cruelly. That stuck with me, and I knew I was done. When I left, he first tried love bombing and begging. He said he wasn't even successful with his ads, so he hadn't done anything wrong and didn't cheat. Suddenly, I was his everything, and he promised to change. He mailed my parents a letter apologizing for what he did to me, but also said that he had idolized me and that I had led him away from God. When I didn't budge, he got mean. Through a text, he said he didn't want to use this, but I had forced him to. Then he sent me a recording of our conversation when I agreed to let him cheat. This was his proof that I had agreed, and he said I should come back because he hadn't done anything wrong. At that moment, I knew he was a very disturbed person. He made our divorce extremely hard and fought it all the way. I was forced to attend court-ordered counseling with him. When he knew it was over, he went further. He printed out embarrassing private conversations between us from Facebook Messenger about joking and talking about intimacy. He mailed those to my parents to humiliate me. That was over 10 years ago. He is still single and lives with his sister and her husband. He made the local news 2 years ago for threatening local government officials over Facebook while drunk. The FBI searched his house and confiscated his guns. He pled to a lesser misdemeanor charge of harassment in order to get the felony threat charge dropped. He's also not allowed to own guns anymore and had to give a DNA sample. He was obsessed with guns, so I love that for him. I am now in a stable 5-year relationship with a wonderful man who is my best friend and partner. He makes me so happy and treats me with respect. He's the best thing to happen to me. We live a great middle-class life and hope to have kids someday. Story 9. My ex used to talk about his traumatizing stories in Afghanistan and claimed to have night terrors. Later, I found out from his ex-wife, who he cheated on with me, something I only learned later, that he was only ever deployed to Japan. He bragged about these false stories to actual veterans who had really been in Afghanistan. He was also the kind of guy who once approached me at my job, offering to model me for him and go on a road trip where he would pay for everything. Edit. My ex did way more than just this. I truly believe he was at the very least a narcissist. It was an emotionally abusive relationship. He cheated on his wife with me, and I later learned the truth. He told me she was a crazy person, but she wasn't. She was actually quite lovely. He bragged about things like being with 2 women who were lesbians, which was also a lie. He even claimed to know the guy who had assaulted me and said he would beat him up. Both were military. My family has lots of military people, so my mom knows how to fold the flag for funerals. He once offered to do it, talking about how he had supposedly done it many times for fallen men. He did it wrong, and my mom quietly fixed it. His big thing was bragging about being with virgins. After all his talk of us being in love, he eventually ghosted me. I went to his place and saw another woman behind him. I slapped him, if that helps. As for the stories he told, one really stuck with me. He said he played the song Pet by A Perfect Circle, and his sergeant supposedly told him to start shooting. He claimed either a coworker or an enemy was blown to pieces, and he picked up a hand and went to a coworker asking if he needed a hand. As much as I love that joke in a dark humor sense, it was deeply disturbing that he would lie about something like that. Story 10. There was this one guy I met during a screenwriting course. On our first session as a group, people had gathered but no one was speaking. Since I can be outgoing sometimes, I initiated a light-hearted group introduction. People picked up and joined in happily. Except one guy. He just felt off the whole time. Sometimes you just feel it, like something about a person isn't right. There was another member, clearly autistic, who was nice and spoke openly about his social struggles. Before one session, I caught the strange guy talking this person's ear off about different hardcore drugs he had tried and about how he had connections to violent gangs in America. In class, whenever he contributed, it was always about his love for body horror. The more graphic, the better, and about how gang members operate. He seemed eager to shock people with these disturbing ideas for horror films. After about 7 classes, he suddenly erupted at the teacher for no reason, threatening her and shouting insults. A few of us tried to calm him down, but he was seeing red and stormed out. They banned him and refunded all his money, which they never usually did. The fact that they did it showed how much of a threat he felt like. I have no doubt he was not well and could have been very dangerous. Story 11. Sigh. My father. He had a rough life, sure, but he never had the tools to be a decent human being. His mother was married 11 times. He left school in 6th grade and was using drugs not long after. He would take breaks from hitting us when mom wasn't home to play his games. Stuff like pounding a hammer around our feet while giggling. Dance over and over. You know the knife and finger game, where you try to stab quickly between your fingers? We got that too. He told us he was teaching us not to flinch, and then there was the Sewell abuse. My poor sister got the worst of that. Things finally ended when I came downstairs in the middle of the night and interrupted him choking my mom. See, he had been abusing all of us, but each of us tried to hide it from the others. I became frighteningly good at hiding what I was going through. He ended up marrying the woman he had been cheating with. They thought it was funny to move into a house 1 block behind us with the same street number. Eventually, Mom sold our home, and guess who bought it? Story 12. When I was in high school in a small town, there was a girl in my class who was definitely the weird kid. I usually paid no mind to that because many of my friends were considered weirdos too, but with her, I just got the strangest vibe. I felt kind of bad about it because it felt like I was being judgmental, but something was just off about her, so I never cared to get to know her. Fast forward a year later, and my roommate, let's call her DI, got a call from her mom who was freaking out. She told Di not to get rides from anyone except me or her family for a while, even if they were her friends. Dee asked what was going on, and her mom said her friend's niece had just been murdered. Turns out the weird girl from my class was part of the group that killed her. It was a group of 3 people who murdered a girl named Cynthia Hoffman in a horrifyingly cruel way. They bound her, shot her, and dumped her body in a river at a popular trail. They tried to make it seem like she had gone missing, even leaving her belongings at a park. But they were soon found out. They did this because a man from another state was grooming the girl from my class on Facebook, claiming to be a millionaire. He wasn't. He was just a manipulative loser. The girl from my class had recorded and sent him inappropriate content, and he offered her a large sum of money to kill someone and send proof. Once this all came out, I didn't feel bad anymore for trusting my gut about her. I think I picked up on the fact that something was deeply wrong with her, even if I was too young to realize I should trust that instinct. Story 13. One time I was working at a lab in my university as a student employee. While I was wiping down the desks, I walked by a table full of students. One guy looked at me and said to his friends that he'd like to assault me, and loudly guessed I was Filipino or Guatemalan, adding that he'd never been with either before. I didn't know how to react, so I kept cleaning and ignored them because I didn't want to get fired. And at 5'0", I didn't want to provoke him or his friends. I was at an art school, and since I'm brown, I didn't want to get blacklisted for being difficult by reporting. They kept talking and guessing my ethnicity and making comments about hurting me. They eventually got bored and left after I stayed cleaning a table near other students. Absolutely terrifying. It was the dead look in their eyes and the laughter that really sticks with me today. Edit. Just for more background on this incident, it involved 5 students, 3 men and 2 women, who were all talking about wanting to assault me. I'm just a really short guy. It was absolutely terrifying, and I don't think I really let myself process it as anything but absurd, mainly because they never successfully guessed my ethnicity. But obviously, this was a very, very bad situation, surrounded by very, very bad people. Good news is I'm okay now and graduated. Story 14. Long ago, I was inspecting a peanut factory as a supply-side auditor and got partnered with a brunette woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s. I was the new guy and she had about a decade more experience than me. Immediately, she seemed unfriendly and demanding. Not the first auditor I had met like that. We agreed to take separate cars to the site. She made a point to say she wanted to be out by 3 p.m. Seemed like a weird request since that meant we couldn't be as thorough. Honestly, this factory was pretty terribly run, but it was in a red state and they tended to treat employees badly. At one point, I interviewed a young woman about my age who said she had been harassed on the job. She was actually crying as she told me this. Being new, I went to my partner because I wasn't sure what to do. When I asked to speak with her, she gave me the dirtiest look, like she was angry at me. I explained the situation, and she gave me a snarky response about how everyone could hear the girl crying, and it was annoying. I had no idea how to interpret that, so I asked her if we should bring it up to management. She flat out scolded me, "Do you want to do more work?" I was really put off by her attitude and callousness. I told her we should investigate more, and she said I could do that, but I'd be doing it alone. Later, toward the end of the meeting, when we were giving feedback to the managers, I decided to bring up the harassment. The look my partner gave me still lingers in my mind. It was like she genuinely wanted to harm me. The managers mentioned they were aware of the employee's claim, but said the area had no cameras and there was no one to corroborate either story. So they ended up switching her shifts so that she and the other employee worked completely different schedules in separate parts of the building. Because there was no evidence, I couldn't do more. After the audit, I remember my partner looked at her watch. It was 4 p.m., and she shot me one more dirty look before we left. To this day, she's probably the most callous person I ever met. According to a friend who worked at the company, this brunette woman often talked about cheating on her husband and admitted to just not caring about people in general. I'm pretty sure she was a sociopath. Story 15. I've had the misfortune of having a few people in my circles who were disturbing creeps and narcissists, but this is the worst one I know of. Let's call him Bob. Bob was a regular at the local hobby store and played card games in the same circles as my friends. He was weird, pervy, and nerdy, but nothing super obviously dangerous, like he would hold eye contact with girls' chests when talking to them. There were rumors he got escorts when he went to conventions. That kind of thing. He wasn't a friend, just some guy in the scene that I occasionally hung out with in groups. I had a boyfriend at the time, and we were on and off. One time he ditched a movie with me, so I went with Bob as some immature attempt to make him jealous. My boyfriend wasn't threatened, for good reason. Bob fell asleep and snored loudly not even halfway through. He then suggested dinner, which ended up being a bar at 4 p.m. that wasn't serving food yet, and him convincing the bartender to split the cost of a pizza delivery. Not impressive. So far, this was just a pathetic guy, right? Well, fast forward several years. My now ex moved to a different state for work, and Bob got hired at the same company. Eventually, my ex moved back, and since we were on friendly terms, we caught up. I asked about Bob. Turns out Bob got addicted to meth and went completely off the deep end. I was given a link to a court case where Bob had been arrested for trying to exchange meth to another creep in order to gain access to that guy's very young daughter, for the worst reasons you can imagine. The signs were there, but holy hell did that man escalate. Makes my skin crawl. Story 16. I have been pretty lucky to not be involved with truly disturbing people, but there were some bad incidents and stories. I saw an elementary school friend kicked in the ribs by his father. His mother was a narcissist. Worst birthday party ever was at her home. Apparently, seeing her son and friends having a good time wasn't okay for her. During and after the divorce, she actively tried to punish her ex-husband. She used their kids as a weapon, saying terrible things about him to them and making it nearly impossible for them to have a good relationship with their father. My friend lives across the country now. One son lost control of himself mentally, and the daughter jumped off a bridge. Then there was a college housemate who enjoyed messing with other people. One time he bragged about making friends with a diagnosed schizophrenic and then stealing his medicine. I hope it wasn't true, but I wouldn't put it past him. There was also a former family friend who committed fraud and stole money from other friends. One person even lost their house as a result of investing with this person, and not someone I knew directly, but my parents once told me about a former member of their social circle before I was born. That person was a psychiatrist who recorded client sessions, played them for other people, and then mocked the clients. It was the only time I ever heard my father call someone evil. Story 17. When I was in USMC boot camp in the spring of 2000, we had a guy in our platoon named Sheldon. He was a physical fitness stud, did all the push-ups, and the drill instructors loved him. Until the second month of boot camp, when we had to pass a multiple-choice history of the Marine Corps test. The drill instructors went over the test and literally told us the answers. All we had to do was memorize them, and when we took the test the next day, it would be easy. The night before the test, I had fire watch duty, 2 hours guarding the barracks while everyone slept. Everybody was asleep except Sheldon. This kid was awake, mumbling to himself, saying something strange about the Marines and how he wanted to join, but nobody would let him, and that history wasn't important. I told him to go to sleep, that we had a test tomorrow, but that it should be easy since the DIs had given us the answers. My watch ended, I went to bed, and when I woke up, Sheldon was missing from our platoon. I asked the drill instructors, and they told me the only thing I should worry about was passing the test. 2 days before graduation, the DIs finally told us that they had to remove Sheldon from our platoon and eventually kick him out of the USMC because on the night when he wouldn't go to sleep, they found a diary in his locker. It basically said he was going to kill all of us when we got to the rifle range because we thought he was dumb. Story 18. I used to work at a local CVS-type store in the Tower District in Fresno. I worked in a payment center office. My supervisor had her desk in the office due to how much cash we handled. We had a regular customer who came in every month. He was fairly charismatic. He kept trying to get her on a date, but she was polite and said no every month. I saw him often hanging around outside when I'd take a smoke break on the side of the building. Genuinely, he seemed like a nice, happy guy. One day, shortly after coming home from work, I flipped on the TV and clicked through the news stations. Cable always had a slight delay from landing on a channel before clicking to the next. I happened to catch CNN for a brief second where they said, "We're here in Fresno," which surprised me. I flipped back, and there was a whole SWAT team in front of a house in the Tower District. They had a helicopter flying overhead, and several local news stations were reporting. Then they said the resident's name, Marcus Wesson. My jaw dropped when they showed his picture, confirming it was the same man. What came of that whole situation made me sick. He turned out to be a mass murderer and child abuser, convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder and multiple crimes against his own daughters. My supervisor told us the next day that at one point she had considered meeting him for coffee but was very glad she never did. Story 19. A substitute teacher at my former high school. I had him as a substitute once, and he often supervised the school's resource center. He also subbed for academic-level math, chemistry, biology, and other subjects. He seemed like a nice guy, although he did come across as a bit introverted and socially awkward. I thought nothing of it. 2 years after I graduated, a news release was posted on social media by the RCMP saying they had arrested a man for possession and distribution of child pornography. They released his name, which didn't ring a bell at first. Then I learned he was a substitute teacher for my province's public school board. So I went on Google and found a LinkedIn profile under his name. When I saw his picture, my mouth dropped open. I realized, holy crap, this man taught at my high school. He ended up facing several more charges, most of which he admitted to, while one is still pending. Even the brief court summaries were unsettling. In online chats, he had made troubling remarks that showed how dangerous his mindset really was. I felt sick realizing I had once been in the same room with him, never knowing who he truly was. Story 20. My sister, she's a pathological liar and probably some sort of psychopath. She invented an entire life for herself and even faked her own death. Twice. Anything she tells anyone about her life is probably a lie. And the woman is like a cult leader. People believe everything she says, and not only do they believe it, they will defend her as if it's their job. Even when confronted with the truth about her, her friends will literally fight anyone who says something that doesn't match what my sister told them. I don't know how she convinces people that everything out of her mouth is the gospel truth. She's been doing it for 40 years. Something is working for her. Very few people have ever questioned her. Anyone who even thinks about questioning her better be careful. They'll be in for a world of trouble if she finds out. She has done some extreme things in retaliation against people she considers a threat to her invented life. I could go on all day about the wild, illegal, borderline illegal and immoral things she's done, and she does not have an ounce of remorse about any of it. Story 21. When I worked at a psych hospital, my very first day I assessed this young man with schizophrenia. He desperately wanted to be put inpatient. He had been before. The family didn't speak English and couldn't afford his medication. His dad was in denial of the diagnosis. The young man was fully psychotic at that point, but anyone who has worked with people in psychosis knows that sometimes, even in that state, they find a way to communicate what they need. He looked at me and said, "Please don't let my dad take me home." I told him, "Don't worry, we're holding you." After a few weeks, he was discharged, but I knew he wouldn't get the regular medication he needed due to finances and cultural beliefs. Years later, it was in the paper that someone stole a car and drove it into the mall, cruising slowly at a few miles an hour. He wasn't trying to run anyone over, just completely out of touch with reality. He was arrested for terrorism and given a slew of charges. It turned out to be the same guy I had seen years prior. His face looked distorted and frightening in the news photo. A lot of people don't realize that people in full-blown psychotic episodes physically look different. I knew in my gut something was off with him. The saddest part is that he seemed aware of it and didn't want to be this way. He wasn't a sociopath. He just had uncontrolled mental illness. The interviews with his family saying he did so well when on medication broke my heart. Story 22. My former best friend, she had bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. One night she went into psychosis and started slicing up her arm like a Thanksgiving ham. Then the screaming started. I was furiously dialing her mother on every phone number I had, including her mother's husband's phone. Of course, her parents didn't answer. We got her in the car, but she kept grabbing the steering wheel as I followed behind in a separate car. We finally got her to her mom's house. I was pounding on the door, and her mom casually opened it. I told her what happened. Her mom was nonchalant about it, like this sort of thing happened all the time. My friend was acting completely out of control through the ordeal. I spent the next day cleaning up blood. Story 23. I have this distant cousin who I always thought was creepy. He moved to the same town I grew up in, and he would hang out with my dad occasionally and come to cookouts. I always thought something was off about him, even when I was a kid. I never wanted to be alone with him. One of my only vivid memories from being a teenager is when I was 13, my grandma died, and he came and basically tried to cuddle me on the couch, saying it would be okay. I got out of there immediately, ran into my room and locked the door. I didn't tell my parents because I was too young to understand how weird that was. When I was 17, my grandpa, who lived next door, died, and my dad found him. My dad could barely speak, and I had just finished basic CPR/first aid. The man was 300 pounds, so I couldn't get him on the ground to perform CPR. I called 911. EMS came and the whole family gathered, including my creepy cousin. Later that night, my best friend came over to keep me company. We stepped outside and my cousin was at my grandpa's house with my uncle. He didn't realize we could hear their conversation. He made a shocking remark about me and my mom. My uncle, who I'm very close with, reacted immediately and confronted him. We could see everything from the porch. Afterward, my uncle told my dad, and he got involved as well. My cousin left humiliated and was never welcomed at another family gathering again. Story 24. My friend's sister dated this guy who was angry and abusive. She was 1 year older than us, but he was 5 years older. Once she fled a fight with him by going to the bowling alley we were at. I think I was in 8th grade. Eventually he showed up, and we didn't even notice until he marched up to us and pushed me aside to get to her. The cops were called, and we had to leave. When she officially broke up with him, she hid for a while. He showed up to their house and put a gun to my friend's head, threatening to kill her if she didn't reveal her sister's location. Thankfully, nothing came of it, aside from my friend being traumatized. He had a tendency to hang out behind my high school even though he had already graduated. He always had some younger girlfriend he was picking up. He went to the military at some point but was dishonorably discharged. There were plenty more stories about his violence and the cops being called, but I don't know all the details as I stayed far away from him. When he finally showed up in the news, I was not surprised but still devastated. It felt like there had been so many chances to lock him away or take away his guns. On his last day alive, he tied up his wife and locked her in their home, then drove to her family's church and carried out a mass shooting. I refused to look him up. His face is nightmare fuel. But it was the Sutherland Springs church shooting, where over 20 people were killed. Story 25. My couch surfing host about 8 years ago. It started badly, as we were supposed to stay 2 nights at his place, but he canceled the first night a day or two before our arrival. We had to pay for a hotel. We were poor students, which is why we were using couch surfing and not hotels initially. Everything was weird that night. We arrived at the address he gave us, but we couldn't find his place. All we could see was a massage parlor where you couldn't see inside. It was located in the red light district of Hamburg, Germany. So not sure it was an actual massage place. Probably a different type of establishment, which wouldn't be surprising in that neighborhood. In the end, his place was actually the massage parlor. It was a normal apartment from the inside, at least for the parts we saw. But strange noises came from the basement. He insisted we go downstairs to help him with the bedsheets. I refused. I said I had hurt my knee and couldn't use the stairs, which was true. I had injured it during this trip. Maybe it was just washing machine noises, maybe not. I'll never know. He kept calling my friend names and blaming us for not paying him for the accommodation. He repeated that the last guest from Airbnb had paid him. Obviously, Airbnb equals paid accommodation. Couch surfing equals free accommodation, at least back then. We were the worst guests he ever had. We went grocery shopping because he said, "We can't order food, I'm a chef. I don't eat other people's cuisine." I didn't care. It was cheaper to cook something quick anyway. On the metro, he insisted we change our route to go to his friend's house outside Hamburg. We felt unsafe with him, so we said no. Let's stick to the plan and go back to his place. On the metro ride back, he offered us ice cream from his pocket. He was storing ice cream in his pocket with no packaging. Then once at home, he cooked his Lidl frozen pizza on a waffle machine. Remember, he said he was a chef. He kept blaming us for making a mess because the pizza dripped onto the counter. How was that our fault? My friend and I were eating a tomato salad. He told us his roommate was crazy and might be loud during the night. Indeed, all night long, she was screaming, laughing, and singing in a way that felt like a horror movie. We were supposed to leave his place at 8 a.m. to catch our bus. We left at 5 a.m. quietly so he wouldn't hear us. We finished our sleep on the bus. Many other weird things and conversations happened that night, but I'll keep this short by not writing them. Days later, he left a positive comment on my couch surfing profile. Nice to meet them. Had nice talks. Story 26. This guy I briefly dated years ago. He was delusional. He told me he owned a magazine and had previously worked for GQ. He even had a fake website for his pretend magazine. He told me he was going on a trip and asked me to come. So I said sure and booked time off. I had no idea he was delusional yet. He had his assistant send me the itinerary that looked like a boarding pass. He didn't have an assistant. It was just him pretending. It wasn't a ticket or boarding pass. Then mysteriously, the trip never happened. He also tried to convince me he was 5 feet 9 inches, but he was only an inch taller than me, and I'm 5 feet 4 inches. I didn't care, but it was so strange that he would lie about something so obvious. The final straw was one night when he was at my place. He went out to run an errand. I came home and found him in my bathroom shaving his head with blood smeared on the door and walls. I found 2 empty wine bottles. I'd only been gone for maybe an hour. I tried to get him to leave, and he wouldn't. He got aggressive, but I managed to get him out of the bathroom and lock myself inside to call the cops. 5 officers came. Since my bathroom was by the front door, I heard shuffling in the hall. I managed to slip out, open the front door, and one cop grabbed me and pulled me into the hall as they stormed in. I don't know what happened inside, but I heard a struggle, and they took him out in cuffs. When I went back in, my couch was tipped over, and the living room was a disaster. They asked me what I wanted to do. I was so shaken I didn't press charges. I just asked that they take him to the hospital. He was put on a psychiatric hold. There were many other lies he had told me, like renting a fancy office building for his magazine, or claiming he went to NYC for a week when he never left town. He even stole $300 from my coat pocket. After him, I basically thought, you know what? I think I'm fine if I never date again and just die alone. But 8 months later, I met my husband. Story 27. I took a road trip from Illinois to Oregon when I was in my 20s, and I only brought my 5-year-old with me. We went to the Tillamook Air Museum. It was so cool. But the whole time I had the absolute worst feeling in my gut. This guy kept following us, asking if I was alone. We were literally the only ones in this huge old air hangar that had been turned into a museum. I lied and said my dad was meeting us later. We'd think we lost him, but then he'd be right behind us. I had this screaming feeling inside that he was dangerous. At one point, I even took my phone out before going outside and pretended to talk, saying, "Okay, yeah, Dad, I'm on my way." I told the lady in the museum store that this guy was creeping me out. He came outside and just stared at us getting in the car. I truly feel like I escaped something terrible. Every once in a while, I look up missing people or crimes in that area, but I haven't found anything yet. It's been 10 years and I still get shivers thinking about it. He didn't do anything to us, but it was one of the most creeped out I've ever been. I'm so glad we got away. Story 28. Many years ago, right when home computers and inkjet printers first became available, we had an IT guy who would come to our office for repairs. He was unsettling and creepy, and he really attached himself to one of the women I worked with, who was a very petite young lady. The two of us would talk after he left about how bizarre he was and how uneasy he made us feel. I've always enjoyed technology and photography, so he shared with me how he would take photographs of his stepdaughter, print them out in 4 panels, and tape them together to make a larger frame picture. At the time, I didn't see the red flag and chatted with him about it more than once. About a year later, he went missing, and the news came out that he had been abusing his stepdaughter and making child exploitation material. We also found out that he was a cross-dresser, so for the longest time, police weren't sure if he would be presenting as a man or woman while on the run. The woman I worked with was especially unsettled, fearing he might come after her. They eventually found his body hanging in a tree about a month and a half later. Probably the best ending possible to that story. Story 29. I worked as an OT in home health. I called and made an appointment for an evaluation. Then later that day, I arrived at a rundown long-term hotel. The man had been hospitalized for cardiac issues, so I was there to help with equipment for energy conservation and similar needs. He had a flat effect and spoke in a monotone mid-level yell. His bed was a bare mattress that looked like it had been slept on for so long it was covered in a thick layer of dark grease. The rest of the housekeeping was just as bad. I sat in a lone plastic chair at the end of the bed, and he sat on the edge of the bed between me and the only exit. I had just started the evaluation when I got an email on my phone that flagged me. Then my phone rang. It was one of the social workers on our team. I told him I had to quickly grab the call, and as I made eye contact with him, she explained that he had been imprisoned multiple times for abuse and violence against children, and also violent offenses against female caregivers. Most recently, he had punched a female staff member in the face 5 or 6 times unprovoked. She was badly injured. Taking that call while he sat there watching me was terrifying. I ended the call and tried to plan an exit strategy. Only a minute later, he started explaining how a friend of his was actively abusing an adolescent boy in a local apartment complex. I decided to stay a while longer, acting friendly and trying to pry details about the boy and the offender. I stayed for a good 40 minutes, blending my questioning into the evaluation. I was careful not to provoke him, and by the time I worked toward leaving, he probably thought we were pals. I set up a next visit, zipped my bag, and left. I pulled into a parking lot a quarter mile down the road and called the police, giving them all the details I had learned. I obviously never went back. I still can't believe I wasn't warned beforehand how dangerous he was. It makes my skin crawl to this day. Story 30. I was working on a small island in the South Pacific many years ago. I had a customer at the store I worked at who often came to me because I had knowledge about his job, welding. After knowing him for several months, I learned his history. He was from another country and had come there for work. One night, while drunk, he challenged a martial arts teacher to a fight. The teacher beat him up pretty badly. Later that night, my customer broke into the teacher's house and killed him with a machete. He went to jail there, but their system involved letting inmates out to work or do errands daily from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I think he served maybe a decade at most before being released. He was restricted from drinking alcohol after that. One night I ran into him at a bar. He was drunk. I said hi and asked him how his day was. He replied, "It was a tough day." I said something like, "I know how that is." Then he got confrontational and said, "No, man, you don't know. You don't know." Then he stared me down for about a minute before I excused myself and went home. I can't say I slept well that night. Story 31. The couple we bought our first house from were very creepy. They were selling because they were getting divorced, and she was close to being foreclosed on. We met them both at the closing, and oddly enough, he wouldn't let go of her hand. She was also at the house during the walkthrough, which she shouldn't have been, but we didn't know any better, and followed us through the house. Once the house was completely empty, we noticed poems and threats that he had written to her. They were painted over, but you could still clearly read them. There were even messages written on the backs of doors, all things that had been hidden when we first viewed the house. It turned out she was a school bus driver who was having an affair with a high schooler who rode her bus, and he was apparently unstable. 6 months after we closed on the house, I read in the paper that she had passed away, though I never found out the exact circumstances. They had 3 kids, but I don't know what happened to them. We've since sold the house, but during the 8 years we lived there, we kept finding strange and creepy messages in hidden places. Story 32. My ex and I went to Pensacola for a vacation. I stopped at a Circle K for beer, and there was a homeless guy outside. His gaze almost stopped me in my tracks. Beautiful ice blue eyes, but hard. A mixture of hate and regret, maybe envy. I can't quite put my finger on it. At the very least, the guy had seen things. My instinct said he had done things, and there he was in Florida, possibly on the run. It was hot and humid. but I was chilled to the bone by this man. At one job, I worked with a guy who had an obsession with cops, being a cop, guns, and news about police violence. He also had a compulsion to steal. I didn't trust him, so I went with the keep your friends close and your enemies closer approach. I gave him rides home a few times, but he would never let me drop him off in front of his house. One night, while driving him home, I had to stop for gifts for an upcoming birthday party. Out of the blue, he told me his brother was forcing him to steal and went on about how their mother died, left his brother the house, and hinted that his brother would mistreat him if he didn't do as told, which apparently included shoplifting. It was bizarre. At a completely different job, I had the weirdest district manager. He was affable in some ways, but he had this strange laugh that he used for everything. At first it was fine, but over time it just felt eerie. People joked that you could tell him his mother had died, and he'd still use that laugh. There were also cocaine rumors, just rumors, but there was definitely something off about him. And then there was a girl I worked with who had an unusually high S-drive. Nothing wrong with that, but she would tell wild stories. One day she casually shared a story about being assaulted, but brushed it off like it wasn't really assault, even though she admitted she hadn't consented. She said she wouldn't even message the guy about it. That disturbed me. It felt like I was seeing trauma buried under a confident front, and I realized she probably had a long history of terrible experiences. Story 33. I knew a guy. I won't say who he was to me for privacy reasons. He's dead now, which was honestly a relief when I heard. He was a complete pathological liar, incredibly charming. All of his friends loved having him around. I say friends because they didn't really know him. Nobody did. I knew him for 10 years and eventually found out that nearly everything he told me about his life was a lie. He even claimed, boastfully, that the first time he had ORS was when he was 7. He said it to one-up his friends who had stories from their early teens. He bragged that it was with his sister, saying she did stuff with him while babysitting. Later, I found out none of it was true. She never babysat him. There was proof she had been living with relatives in another state at the time. People like that make you question your sanity. You know they're lying, but they're lying to everyone else too, and telling different lies to each person. That's how they eventually get caught by some people. But there are always others who stay fooled, believing everything they say. With people like that, you have to completely walk away because their lies spread like tar and drag everyone around them down. Story 34. Sadly, my oldest niece. She just turned 16, but she has been doing disturbing things for years. When she was 12, she stayed with me and confided that she daydreamed about killing her family and that she felt a thrill from tossing her little brother around. He was only 4 at the time. I called my brother, her dad, immediately after they left to tell him what she said. He just sighed and said, "Yeah, that's something we're used to," and explained that she had been in therapy for it. From that moment, I had a gut feeling she would eventually do something more sinister. Cut to January 2024. My wonderful stepdad passed away from cancer. We were devastated. According to my niece, however, no one was more devastated than her, not even my mom. My brother had arranged hotel rooms for his wife, kids, and me so we could be together during that difficult time. But in the end, only he made it to the funeral. Why? Because my niece had been plotting for the entire week to strangle her younger sister in her sleep. The school caught wind of it and reported it, thank God. Would she have gone through with it? Who knows? But I shuddered to think what could have happened if the girls had been in my hotel room and I woke up to see one of them dead. I'm deaf and a heavy sleeper, and they know this. Since then, my niece has been in and out of facilities. She takes no responsibility or accountability for her actions. Even more chilling, she still calls her younger sister her best friend and can't understand why her sister is terrified of her. Both siblings are rightfully scared to be around her. At home, everyone has to sleep with their doors locked. Attention must always be on her, or she will find a way to make it about her. When her sister was set to go to camp this past summer, my niece purposely burned her own neck with a curling iron to redirect focus. She's tried to set the house on fire twice. She was kicked out of one facility for threatening to kill her roommate. She steals from everyone around her. I could go on, but you get the picture. My poor brother and sister-in-law are at a loss. That's why she's currently in a long-term program where she'll likely remain until she turns 18, at which point she may be turned over to the state if nothing changes. She regularly expresses that she wishes her siblings were dead or gone so that she could be an only child. It's terrifying. She's too young to be formally diagnosed, but she shows clear signs of borderline and antisocial traits, maybe even elements of the dark triad. My heart breaks for the way her mind works and for the toll it takes on everyone around her, but she is dangerous. She can be charming and sweet, but it's all an act. I love her dearly, but I truly believe that if left alone with her siblings, she would harm them. I've seen the glint in her eye when she talks about hurting them. It's chilling. Story 35. When I was 21, I got a job as a live-in nanny for a wealthy family. At first, everything seemed perfect. The parents were busy professionals, the house was gorgeous, and the kids, 2 boys, ages 6 and 8, were polite and quiet. Almost too quiet. I figured they were just shy around me at first, but within days I started noticing things that made my stomach turn. The older boy especially had a disturbing streak. One afternoon I caught him cornering his younger brother in the backyard, holding a stick against his throat. When I yelled, he dropped it immediately and gave me this eerie little smile. Later, when I told his parents, they brushed it off with, "Boys will be boys." But it wasn't that simple. I had worked with kids before, and this wasn't roughhousing. It was something darker. As weeks passed, I found mutilated insects left on my bed, my shoes filled with water, and the family cat trembling whenever the older boy came near. Once I walked into the playroom and saw him holding the cat upside down by its tail. I froze and demanded he let it go. He did, but only after staring me dead in the eye, as if daring me to stop him. The younger brother seemed terrified of him. He flinched whenever the older one came too close. At night, I'd sometimes hear muffled crying from their shared bedroom, followed by whispers and then silence. I tried separating them, but the parents insisted they stay together. The breaking point came one night around 2 a.m. I woke to strange noises, metal scraping against wood. I went downstairs and found the older boy in the kitchen with a knife, carving into the table. When he saw me, he didn't look startled. He just smiled and whispered, "I was practicing." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I told the parents everything. They dismissed my concerns again, saying I was overreacting. I quit that same day and never looked back. I still think about that boy sometimes, wondering what he grew up to become. And I still shiver at the thought that, if I hadn't woken up that night, I might have found something far worse than scratches on a table. Story 36. I met someone when I was a teenager. At first, he seemed relaxed and we got along easily. One day while I was out shopping, he offered to walk me home. That's when everything shifted. His mood changed from friendly to uncomfortable intense. I was only 14, completely unprepared for that kind of moment. It left me unsettled and the memory has stayed with me ever since. Another one I remember is when I was in my early 20s, I was in the passenger seat of my homegirl's car. I guess she must have run a stop sign or something like that. But next thing I know, we were at a red light, and this car pulled up next to us, turning inward to block us. A man jumped out of the car, screaming at my friend about her driving. It was summertime, so we had the windows down. It was late and dark out, so no one else was around. We were startled and just sat there in shock. When he turned to walk away, I screamed, "F you!" My girlfriend immediately grabbed my hand and told me, "No." The guy came back and jumped in my face and told me, "That's how bitches get killed." He was so freaking scary, and I legit think he was a killer. I didn't say anything else, and my friend just kept apologizing until he finally left. During high school, there was a bus often used by many girls from private schools. Its windows were very large. After school, there was always a man who would ride alongside the bus and behave in an extremely disturbing way. It was deeply unsettling. Looking back now, it's shocking how tolerated it seemed at the time. Story 37. A guy me and my brother used to call the King. My mom went into the Mormon church when I was about 5, and after a couple years there, she wasn't the new person at church anymore. There was this brother and sister, both in their late 20s, and my mom befriended them. Turned out they lived in the flat just across from us, so they hit it off really well, and the siblings would come visit sometimes. I was used to my mom being single, and I didn't like having men around the house. I would jump all over this guy when he was there, calling him the King and treating him like a playground, mostly just to annoy him. It seemed to work because I didn't see much of him after that. Then my mom started getting messages while I was outside playing, anonymous numbers describing my clothes, saying they could see me. It escalated so badly that my mom moved the couch against the front door and slept on it. When the police finally became involved, the truth surfaced. The person behind everything was struggling deeply. His sister seemed to know more than she admitted, yet she stayed silent even when my mom shared her fears of being followed. Unfortunately, this wasn't the only shadow in our family's story. My uncle's past was complicated, and later, alongside a partner who was unstable, they were given responsibility for a relative. The outcome was years clouded by sorrow. Looking back, it feels as though my family tree has always carried shadows I wish had never been there. Story 38. The creepy old man who was a regular where I worked. About 3 months into the job, he came in with his son and told me I looked really pretty, then asked me if I wanted to hang out with him. I told him, I'm at work. He pushed, what time do you get off? I lied and told him I was working a double until the next morning. He smirked and said, why don't you just leave with us? I'll pay for your time. I had never been so offended in my life. Degraded, like I could just be bought. Obviously, I told him no. He kept coming in, and I could always feel him staring at me while he was in line or wandering the store. Then one day, exactly 2 years after I started working there, he came in. At the end of ringing up his stuff, he said, you've been here 2 years today, right? Congratulations. Then he winked and left. Who remembers something like that about a stranger? It still makes my skin crawl. And then there was the girl in town who was heavily on drugs. She claimed she was a firefighter, but she'd dance in the middle of the street and almost get hit by cars. She carried a hatchet everywhere and would go around hitting dumpsters and trees, shouting that she was putting out fires. Working as a cashier, I met more than my fair share of disturbing people. Story 39. James Heydrich, a career criminal that was exposed as a telekinesis fraud on national TV by James Randi in the early 80s. He was deemed a violent sexual predator and is currently in a mental hospital after serving only 17 years for molesting 5 boys in California. He was diagnosed with pedophilia and paraphilia, and the man almost got released in 2013, but a hung jury kept him locked up. He's an extremely dark, manipulative person. He's from the area I was raised in, and the one encounter I had with him, through a distant relative, left me deeply unsettled. A lot of people around here have creepy stories about him, from his childhood antics to his crimes as an adult. When he was being transferred out of South Carolina by law enforcement to California, part of it was via a van haul. He mentally messed with the officers so badly during the trip that it made the local newspaper. He's evil personified and terrifyingly good at manipulating people's minds. Story 40. For 5 years, I was close friends with someone who turned out to be showing clear signs of psychopathy. At first, he seemed fun, charming, hilarious, always with a story to tell. But soon I noticed the cracks. Every conversation turned sexual. He bragged constantly, shared disturbing details about his hookups, and even shoved videos and recordings in my face. He stole from jobs, stole from friends, and eventually stole from me. Anytime you called him out, he'd just shrug and say, I don't care. And he meant it. He was violent too, or at least claimed to be. He loved telling me about fights, smiling as he described them in detail like they were video games. He never actually hit me, but he came close. Fake punches, holding a knife to my throat once as a joke, and one time making me hold a punching bag while he hit it as hard as he could to show me his strength. He seemed to feed on fear. Women had it far worse. He targeted vulnerable girls, broken, young, or dependent, and bragged about manipulating them. He was verbally abusive, controlling, even let slip once that he had hit a girlfriend. His need for admiration was constant, and his ego fragile. Behind his big smile and cool guy act, there was nothing but cruelty. The scariest moments were when the mask slipped, when the smile dropped and his eyes went flat and cold. It was like looking at someone with no soul. During lockdown, the truth finally caught up with him. Me, my friends, and his ex all confronted him together and cut him off completely. I still wonder what became of him, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if one day his face shows up in the news for something awful.